So again, this is Adam, and Rebecca is here as well. In just a moment, we are going to talk to Anna Dupre, the host of Anna Rose Reads, a wonderful podcast that has really burst onto the scene and become one of the vital podcasts that you really need to listen to if you're one of the horror community here. And we are very excited to speak with her about how she became a horror reader, how she started interviewing all of these writers, and the sort of horror community in general. So, once again, here is Anna Dupre. Okay, Anna, welcome to the pod. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank
Welcome.
you so much for having me. I'm very excited to get to talk to both of y'all. Y'all are lovely people that I got to hang out with in person at Stoker, and so I will happily chat with y'all whenever I can.
Love it. I was saying to Adam that one of my first questions I had for you is the way you're dressed and the way you look. Do most people expect that you don't love horror? You talk all things horror because, I mean, you're just this little bubbly little bottle of joy.
I think part of it is like growing up in the South is like a very preppy area. So like I didn't get to be into horror until like later in life, like recently. But I will say I always have been drawn to like I guess the darker side of things. Like I've always like
Huh?
really been into mysteries and thrillers, like crime procedurals. I was always like really, really into anything like murder mystery related. There was nothing that I felt was like too gruesome for me. I felt like I could handle it. And so I think for whatever reason, I don't know why exactly that is. I've always tried to unpack that. That's just been like what I've been interested in, like academically speaking and like on an intellectual level. But like outwardly, I'm just like a down the bayou kid, man. Big t-shirts and Nike shorts, and we're, just hanging out. It's very casual. It's very funny, like now that I'm older and like going to things and and I went to I went to Catholic school, so I had a uniform for forever. And now that I have to like pick my style, it's so hard to be like, what is me? What do I look like? Like what reflects who I really am? It's a very weird thing to like think about now in my 20s that I never really had to think about before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. And sort of, pre getting into horror specifically, and sort of our histories with it, I think you sort of start talking about something that's interesting, which is also being someone from the South, and Nashville is where I was born. There's something about the South and the darkness that kind of exists there that lends itself to sort of being of interest to people from there. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think in particular, like Louisiana, like you think of Gothic sometimes, or like Southern Gothic, and you think of a lot of like swampy, like mossy, big trees, secluded houses, that kind of like antique haunted feeling. But I think like in the more present, like modern sense, there's like no, I feel like it's really hard to depict the South. Like when you look at media and television, like True Detective season one was one of the first like places I've felt like I was like, "Oh, yeah, that tracks for rural Louisiana." Because we have New Orleans, that's like our big, hub, and this is kind of getting like really niche to Louisiana horror, not just Southern horror. But in general, we have been like our own thing. Like we are such a unique place that like our industry is so we rely on seafood and, agriculture here are very I don't want to say like we're not and not in a good way sometimes. We're not very dependent on other people. And so, like, independently, we are like known to have these characteristics and these things that I think just kind of speak for themselves. But like, oddly, we're like very secluded. Like, not a lot of people know about like my hometown or like what that there is a south of New Orleans or that what that looks like. You know what I mean? That's a really
Yeah, it's
unique
funny that
place.
you say that because even in a few interviews that you've had recently where you've
Yeah,
said, I'm from south of Orleans, and they're like, what, the ocean or the Gulf of Mexico? And so
yeah.
it is very much this idea that there are places in your more rural areas that still people are not, as a whole, even aware exists, which I think is something that also lends itself really well to this genre.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always fear in the unknown, right? Or like if you see something and you don't recognize it, that's like a lot of times a little fearful. And so I think, there's just a lot that you can play with in the parts of the South that people don't know about. Like there's just a lot of land that is swampland. Like we'll never forget, like I'll go fishing with my dad or like hunting with my dad and I'm like, there could be so many bodies. Nobody would ever know it.
Many bodies.
Like yeah,
Nice.
it's just like it's just like this playground for like this could happen here, and I don't know that anybody would know it, kind of thing. I think that that's what the South does really well, honestly, which is a good and bad thing.
Well, I think that, not just the places where things could be hidden, but the sort of mentality that you don't talk about
Yeah.
what's going on in your family. You don't talk about, anything sort of personal to anyone, whether it's police or anyone else. And that kind of also goes hand in hand with that mentality of, hey, there could be all kinds of things buried back here.
Yeah, it's like that toxic independency, I would say, like, very much that there's a reliance upon you and your family to handle your shit.
Yeah.
Everything else kind of be damned. I mean, that's kinda a little stereotypical, like, I don't think that my family's like that by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know I would be lying if I said I didn't know people like that, and that is, like, kind of the bigger mentality, like, especially for, like, small towns in general, like, I know where I grew up, the home was, like, pretty like, we had a lot of, like, people who would work in the oil field or, like, if you went to New Orleans or, like, if you left the state, it was like, "Oh, they're moving out of state," and it was, like, a whole thing, so there is very much that there's degrees to it for sure, but I think that part of the stereotype of that is very much in a lot of the people I know. But there, like I said, there are a lot of also other people I know that are, fairly progressive and forward minded. It's a weird medley of people, and geographically, it's just a mess. We get hurricanes, we have alligators everywhere, we have strange vermin, neutral rats. It's just a playground. That's all there is to it. Playground for darkness.
Did you say a Nutra?
Yeah, have y'all not heard of those? I can tell
I
y'all
don't know
about
what
those
that
real
is.
quick. Okay, so essentially, like, a beaver, they are like that, except their tails are not flat, and they are I think they're kind of like an invasive species. I don't know if they are anymore, but I think they came over from France, and they eat land. Like, so, like, if you get one in your pond down south, they'll start eating away at the land, like the land will fall through. And like there's a huge hunting industry, and they used to like pay by the tail for their pelts for like mink coats and stuff. It's like there's a whole history to this, and I'm probably completely messing it up. But in general, yeah, they look like a beaver. They have like really long teeth, and they eat grass and land. And we already have enough problems with like land erosion, so the last thing we need is them to come.
So Florida has the snakes and you have Nutra rats.
Yes, exactly, 100%.
Never even, that's so
Yeah.
fascinating. So at
They
some
they
point,
are not
someone
cute.
needs to write a Nutrat into a story.
No, I'm pretty certain at like the local Raising Cane's, which is like one of our fast food like chicken shops in Homa. It's like a
Gotcha.
chain down here, but I'm sure y'all know what I'm talking about. But there was like I'm pretty sure there was a Nutraman like movie poster. And now I'm like I don't know if I'm just like fabricating this on the fly. But I'm pretty sure somebody has written a Nutraman story.
I'll
Like
have to check that.
like the werewolf but Nutra.
Yes, I love that. Going back to that sort of like toxic independency and stuff like that, it's interesting. Even in Tennessee, I remember that there was older family members when they would pass away. Sometimes they would not even alert like authorities or take them to a funeral home. They would just bury them, have a little ceremony
Yeah.
and burying them in the backyard, and that was very like normal to happen. So it was sort of like this idea that you were born, lived, and died in a very like isolated kind of way with your family, especially when you lived, sort of agriculturally and off your own land, and there was still a lot of bartering and stuff going on. So that is a really interesting concept that you bring up. So that was very cool.
Yeah, I think that like I kind of still see it like with a few generations before me, not in terms of like not literally dying where they were raised, but like just the like people not branching out. Like they very much see where they are as home. And I like honestly I really respect it because sometimes I think it's always like a grass is greener on the other side mentality, but a lot of people where I'm from take a lot of pride in where they're from. And they'll work their whole life there. They'll go to school there, they'll get a job there, and they will work their asses off the whole entire time for that place. And I think that there's something really admirable about that, to be that like dedicated to something like that and to love it so much. There does like come a point where I think sometimes it can be like a little toxic whenever it gets to be like, well, we don't take, outside help or we don't want, outside opinion. But yeah, I mean, too much of anything is a bad thing. So it's just
Yeah.
it's interesting to see thing to see, as like times change and stuff like that.
Right. So let's dive into Anna's history with the horror genre, or really reading in general. Like, were you a horror reader as a kid? Was that, you said you were always interested in sort of the darker things, but what's sort of your history generally with the genre and how you got to where you are at this point?
Yeah, I did not read horror as a child by any stretch. I was definitely like a Junie B. Jones Magic Treehouse kid all the way through. I did love Goosebumps, don't get me wrong. I did have a friend who like we would trade them and read them, and that was very fun. But I was never like I don't know that I was like much of a scaredy cat. I don't know. Like I just didn't really mess with it, I don't guess. But it wasn't until I was like, I'd say in high school, like really wanted to start reading like mysteries and thrillers. And so I remember like I read like Gone Girl and Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn and all that good stuff. And I really, really connected with those. Like I just thought they were so interesting. And then kind of like as a it's a FU to go into Catholic school, we had to do a research paper. And, we got to pick the book, which was, a rarity. And I was like, I'm gonna read The Shining by Stephen King. I'm gonna write my paper on King and The Shining. And I feel like it was a little out of left field. Like I did like really, I don't even remember how I landed on it other than to be like, I want to do something different. And it got approved and I did it and I really enjoyed it. And I don't know that I fully got what I should with The Shining at that point because I was like 15. Um, but it was I remember thinking it was different than what I expected. But I think for me, I used to be a lot more, and I still am, very logical and like reasonable. So to me, like the thriller and crime mystery genre like appealed to me because I was like, oh, there's a workflow here. Like I can pick up on this pattern. I can like make sense of it. This is not going to surprise me in any way. Like this, like there's twists that are great. And if you do surprise me, like good on you. But like I kind of got to the point where I felt like I understood how those stories were told. And it really wasn't until like I was in college I got to like really get into like Karen Slaughter. I mean I still adore her. I still read all of her stuff. But her books got me through a breakup, a really bad breakup. There's nothing like that to like submit your loyalty to an author. And she writes some gritty stuff. And the thing, and I've been to like a book event of hers. I think the thing that really resonated for me was that, a lot of people have asked her why she writes her thrillers that don't necessarily have to be gory or as like graphic as she does. And she's a huge advocate against, like for women's issues and against women, violence against women and children and things like that. And she said, like we're not being real unless we're having the full conversation around what women experience. And I remember thinking like, God, yeah, that's true. Like, you know, I don't know how much of a service we're doing. Like, of course, certain stories have their place, but I felt like, the work that Karen was doing with being as brutally honest as she is felt so much more real to me than anything else. Like that just aligned very much with my understanding of the world. And so that was kind of the tipping point because it's like once you read Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, you can kind of handle anything. Yeah, and I didn't really pick up horror. I mean, I read like a few King books here and there, because it's just like kind of what you do whenever you're a reader. But it wasn't until 2022 in the fall, I was living by myself. I had like gotten my first like really serious job. I picked up I had read some Grady Hendrix and stuff, and I hadn't really like taken to it the same way. But I picked up Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison, and then like that was all she wrote. I read
She's quite
that
the
and that
gateway
like
drug.
changed yeah, that changed everything for me. I wanted to read everything else and like I didn't realize what horror could do at that point. I was still a little hesitant to like fully leave the thriller mystery genre, but I started reading more and more horror. I think I was a little apprehensive about whether or not like I was smart enough to like quote unquote get it. I was like a little fearful that I was just going to be a little too over my head sometimes, but the more I went, the more I like learned to appreciate it. And then before you knew it, I like volunteered to start reviewing for this website and I started writing reviews for fanfiaddict.com for their Fear for All section. That kind of like took on a life of its own where I got really into it, doing the Bookstagram thing, doing the review thing, and then yeah, the interviewing thing just kind of also came out of that as well. So yeah, that's a really long-winded answer.
No, it brings up a lot of interesting things. Okay, so one thing that really stood out for me is that you said, I was afraid I wasn't going to get it or it wasn't smart enough for it. And I think that's really interesting because, at least in my experience, obviously I'm a generation behind and I was really started reading and getting into horror more in the 90s. And it was the opposite. It was like only dumb people read horror. Horror is so like basic. Horror is so, it's like horror and romance are the most sort of like, I don't know how else to put it, but like sort of crapped upon genres, and in terms of like the people that read it aren't sort of on the same level as someone that reads, a Gone Girl or Karen Slaughter or literary fiction. So it's really interesting to hear you say that you were sort of worried that you wouldn't be able to get horror. So like on the outside looking in, what were you thinking the genre was in terms of it being intimidating in that way for you?
Yeah, I had always been kind of like an artsy kid, but like I was like very neat artsy is the way that I think about it. Like I was never like all of the art that I did was like very photorealistic. I like didn't like to experiment. Like I was very like I wanted to be sure in what I was doing, right? And so but it didn't mean that I didn't respect or like see what other artists or like art looked like and was doing. And so I think for me, I was like, I think I was very concerned that I wasn't creative enough, that I was gonna like fully pick up what the author was putting down or like what they were intending to say with their work coming from the like thriller or mystery genre, because it is so linear, right? Like you get A to B to C. If you're lucky enough and you catch it, like you're paying close enough attention, you'll catch like the red herring or the thing that kind of does them in the end.
Mm-hmm.
You with horror, like literally anything at all is possible. And so it also kind of challenged me to like take a back seat from being a reader that was like really competitive and like trying to prove that I could get it right. Like I'm a very competitive person. So like for me to be like, okay, I'm just turning this fully over to the author and letting them say whatever it is was also like a huge step for me, because again, it felt like a measure of my intelligence, like my reading experience, right? So like if I didn't quote unquote get it, then I felt like really dumb and defeated in the end. And that was something I had to like let go of. It was just like a perfectionist flaw that I had for a really, really long time that was not healthy any stretch, but like, I just had to let it go. And like once I did, it was so nice to just let it be.
So a lot of times, like when you think about thrillers, and especially the sort of serial killer books, things like that, a lot of times we call them, like police,
Yeah.
where they're, about trying to find the specific person. I think that kind of that sort of mentality is what you're talking about when it's like applying that or being afraid that you're going to apply that same sort of idea to horror when, and there are like, arguably Silence of the Lambs, a book you really enjoyed and I really enjoyed, also that came out this year about like a serial killer in Louisiana, and I can't think of the title now. I'm sure you
Flesh and blood.
Flesh and Blood.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Where they often sort of like I kind of said it. There's a book coming out by Monique Asher called The Red Knot, and we'll
Yeah.
be talking to her, which is also sort of at that sort of intersection between horror and thriller. Said they kind of like shake hands every now and again. But were you afraid that you're going to bring this mentality of that procedural, and then something was going to be so outside of it that, like as a reader, you just weren't going to connect with it, or you just didn't think you were going to understand what it was that was happening?
Yeah, like a little bit of both, right? Like I didn't want to like pick up a book and be and feel like, to me it's like really, really important that I try and understand like what an author and like to a degree, I mean obviously it's still part of who I am now, to like understand what they're trying to say with their work, right? Whenever they're taking a big swing, like especially in horror, right? Like
Right.
if you're not going to play by the rules, if you're going to play color outside the lines, like what is the reasoning behind that? And so I was very afraid that it was going to reveal some not so great things about my intelligence as a reader, my creativity, and just that it like, it just wasn't for me. But like I didn't realize how relatable it could be. I thought it was like going to be really like all this out there stuff that, like was just like had no context within reality, like wasn't grounded. And like what do you do with like, to me there was also like a practical. I was like, what do you do with that? Like what do you make of that? But and it sounds so pretentious right now, but my life was just like so very logical, and like my job was very logical, and like my upbringing was very logical. So like to try and like kind of go off the rails a little bit felt a little reckless, I won't lie, but I'm that's all I want now.
Well, it's so funny because I think that why authors want to come on your podcast and why you've sort of in popularity and sort of stature, and so fast is because everyone talks about how much your reviews do exactly that and sort of go
Which is such a
deeper.
compliment to you. I love that.
But it's true, like, thinking, it's like your deep dives, even when, you were talking about the first time reading it or different articles that you've done, it is much more than just sort of the linear perspective or the sort of like, oh, this is what the book is about and I liked it or I didn't like it. And so it's funny that that thing that you were sort of afraid of happening, the very opposite of it is what kind of came to be true. And that is sort of how you are known now.
Yeah, I just didn't realize that me and horror were speaking the same language. Like I thought that horror was over there like speaking French and I had taken Spanish in high school and I was like, shit, I'm like up a creek without a paddle. You know what I mean? But apparently we both took some French and some Spanish and we're fine.
So, what made you? Obviously, you said you kind of fell into doing articles and things like that. Was it sort of your exploration of the books that said, you know what, I want to talk to these authors and I want to record myself talking to these authors? How did that come about?
Well, it's kind of like a combination of two things, I'll be honest. One was when I got on with FanFi, who like I'm forever very grateful to David, the guy who runs the website, for like taking me on and like just like kind of like opening every door, right? Like if he got an offer for an arc, he would, pass it along and be like, hey, if you want this, let's like let me know, I'll get you in touch. And then like also with that, came the opportunity for interviews. I mean, like I'm sure that y'all know now, like whenever you get on a lot of like publishers mailing lists for arcs at the beginning of the month or like, a few months out, they'll say like this author is open for interviews or whatever. And I'll never forget, it was for Schrader's Chord by Scott Leeds when it came out. They offered to do an interview. And I mean, like I read that book and I loved it. Like loved it, loved it, loved it. And it was one of those things I was like, well, if they're offering, like, like I don't know how at the time I didn't know how common it would be get something like that. So I was like, man, I probably should do it. And man, I recorded it, or I thought I recorded it with Scott, and like the audio was all messed up. I had to like go back and like piece together the thing and just do like a write up. And I just like did the best I could by it, by like what I had. And then like but I really like, I enjoyed talking to Scott. Like he was so nice. He was so accommodating to my questions, like so thoughtful. And then like the other part of it too was, like we have like, I'm gonna, call out Talking Scared specifically. I heard Neil, like the first episode I heard of his was the one with Mike Flanagan about, his King adaptations and, his work on Hill House and all that. And I am such a huge fan of his work. And I was like, yeah, that's a big name. That seems, like I don't know that I could do that. And then the more that I listened to Neil talk to authors, and then it happened to be books that I was reading, I was like, oh shit, like, he talked to, Rachel Harrison. I was like, oh, I read that book. Let me see what he has to say about, and so then I would listen and they would be going back and forth and I'd be like, why have I, like I'd be in the car, like, no, let's talk about this. Or like, I'll never forget. I think it was one of his interviews with Catriona Ward. I was just dying to like, God, if I could have gotten a word in, like about something that I felt like really passionate about that they were talking about. Not that either of what they were saying wasn't like correct or of interest to me, but I was like, God, I think I have something cool that I think I could maybe add to this. It kind of just like gave me the confidence to maybe try it and see how it went. And so from there, I gotten burned by my bad, my own fault of bad recording experience with Scott. So it took me a while, but I reached out to Liz Karen because I'm very, very passionate about her duology, Knight's Edge, and
Right.
yeah. So I like was so passionate about those books and I was like, listen, if you are open to interviews, like please let me know. Like I'll make it happen. I have so many questions for you. And she was the nicest, kindest person. Agreed to it. And I did it. And I sat on that interview for like 6 months because we talked about spoilers. So I couldn't let it out into the world until a few months had passed after pub day. And it kind of dawned on me. I was like, well, if I'm going to put this out, like, is there like, if I want this to like gain traction, like if I want people to look at it, like there's kind of the expectation, like if I want people to hear what Liz has to say, there's kind of the expectation that there needs to be eyes on this. Like, do I need to make this a thing? Right. And so I like, I was like, I don't want to take up an author's time and then like there not be a whole lot of like visibility or like it falls through the cracks because I just like on a one-off, happen to pick my favorite book of the year and want to talk to that author. I was like, that's not fair. So that was when I was like, okay, you can probably try to like make this a thing. And TJ, my fiance, I have to give him so much credit. He's the one who got me like the mic that I'm using right now and the earphones and everything. He was like, yeah, do it. Go ahead. Like what's the
Love
worst
a
that can
supportive
happen?
partner.
Yes, no, he's the most supportive of all of this. And so I just started doing it. I just started asking people. I don't know why they said yes sometimes. They did. And so I started out on YouTube because podcasting seemed intimidating to me. So I made it work on YouTube. And then I finally got my shit together at the beginning of the year and I figured out how to do the podcasting format. And then I was like, now I need to really buckle down and like get on a schedule. Because before it was just kind of like when I could, I would make it work. And yeah, now it's a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was as solid as it was until like I had talked to some other people.
And you have a brand new logo, which I love.
Yeah, yeah. I did like listen, when I tell you this was the most like pieced together from Canva graphics that I was putting together during a break at work that I had before.
I love it.
I literally was like, like it looks fine enough, it'll be, But then I went to Stoker and like I saw everybody else so prepared, like handing out stickers, and really I was like, I need to get my shit together.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
need to, be
Very
prepared. So that
inspirational,
was
motivational, and kicking the ass to go in the right way. No, but it looks
exactly.
so good. Like it resembles you. And, one of the other things that I know outside of the podcast that you do, I love all your reels. I mean, you make me laugh. You have such creativity with them. And that's not only just from the most recent one of like, hello, are you a Paul Tremblay fan? But also, I love when you show off your art. I mean, it's fantastic. So hopefully, when you talk about like going to events and getting your shit together, hopefully you're going to have some art or something else there because if you want to, no pressure, except I would buy it. But
I already have the
No.
t-shirt.
it looks so good. It's from someone that appreciates that just what other artists can do. I'm certainly not skilled like many other people, but I try and I like it. But when I saw what you just were able to create, it's fantastic. So I mean, obviously you're just creative in all formats and we're just trying to get all the Anna Rose we can.
No, I appreciate that. So, like, that's the biggest compliment right there, I think, And first of all, I have to shout out like Chris Panettiere. He's the one who did the logo. I
Okay.
like literally, I gave him like the most like pieced together, messed up, and he was like, "What were you thinking?" And I was like, "I don't know, like maybe some skulls and shit. That'd be cool."
Anytime you can put end shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I did. I was like, maybe like a flower in there because of my middle name. Or, he's like, I have an idea. Hold on. He got back to me and it was just like this fully formed kick-ass thing that was like so freaking cool. I still cannot thank him enough for doing that because I just think it's so unique and it's so me. I don't know. But to go back to everything else, going to Stoker was the biggest like motivational, inspirational. I don't know what you want to call it, driver, because like there is a degree of burnout with doing stuff like this, especially like I don't live in
Yeah.
a
Okay.
book community area. So it feels like a little remote and a little disconnected, but getting to go and like be around everybody who's like really, really excited about everything makes you excited again, right? So that was a big help. And then the thing with the reels, man, I'm just being dumb. I'm just being so stupid. I just like want to have fun at this point. And so I'm trying to think like what are the things that I see about like romance readers or romantasy readers that they're making reels about that I'm like, oh, you don't see that for horror. And I'm like, I'm just gonna go make it. That's been the approach to the reels and like just trying to be funny and personable. I think being funny goes a long way if it can be
It
helped.
does.
It's not too cheesy anyway.
Yeah. No, it's definitely like the medium that appeals to everyone. It's just like a warm door opener.
I
Yeah,
really love
that's
like
the thing, right? And like that's what I want people to know about horror too, right? Like even
right.
though I was very intimidated by it, like I want people to be like, oh, like it can be like you can make fun of yourself for like liking this really fucked up stuff. It's like, yeah, absolutely, come on in. Everybody's doing it.
I just think that the way I know Adam already touched on it, but to think that you were like, I didn't think I was going to get it. I think for me, it just was so skewed in my mind that it was only one thing,
Mhm.
and just
Yeah.
so heavy and whatnot. And so it is interesting to me now how much humor is in horror books and just, I swear I got to create this graphic that just has all the different like multiple subtypes and genres, within the genre to show it because I
Yeah.
mean it is so many different things and like then it's blended of it. I feel like it's like going to a Subway or something or MTO and just create your own. It's like the combinations are pretty infinitesimal
Mhm.
for what you can expect to read in a book. Anything from bugs to female rage. Okay, we do want to see a slasher, or, it's just, it really is the genre just to explore almost everything. And I never would have thought of that. And so that is my biggest goal here, is to just break down any barriers that someone might think, whether they think that it's French and they only know Spanish, or, that they only like thrillers. It's just like, how do we move more people into, because I think the work that's being done here is so great.
Yeah. No, I could not agree more with what you're saying, and that was, like, very much how I felt, like, I don't wanna say, like, I thought everything was Stephen King, but I did think if it wasn't Stephen King, it was very, like, Lovecraftian. I was like, "Ugh, I don't know if I can get I don't know if my
Yes.
brain can get wrapped around cosmic horror," you know? Like, I thought it was either, like, really, really grounded like King, or it was really, really out there like Lovecraft, and there's so like, it's been, like, a fairly recent thing. I'd say, like, within the last, like, 5 years, we've had such a boom of horror with, like, all the different voices that we're showcasing, and, like, there being a genuine interest from an audience to fuel that, right? Like, because that's part of it too, is like, the stories that are gonna get written are the ones that people wanna read,
Yes.
and there's an actual desire from people, which is really heartening to read every variety of horror, It
Yeah.
wouldn't be happening if that wasn't
Right.
there.
I think it's such an inclusive community, and like, just like you said, there's a desire to read so many different types. So if you were to, being that you were coming from, just being a thriller reader into becoming a horror reader, if we're trying to expand, audiences here, what are some of your go-to books when you find out someone is just trying out horror for the first time and you have to kind of ease them in? Like, do you have a couple go-to books or authors in particular?
Yeah, I kinda like I try and, like, base it on what they're currently reading or, like, what they're into. So, like, for instance, like, if I know somebody's, like, really into true crime, or like, like very serious, earnest crime procedural. I would like even go to say like A Flesh and Blood by N.L. Lavin and Hunter Burke, which just came out this year, which is, it's set in Louisiana. I'm a little biased because it's local, but it does walk that fine line of being a procedural until maybe or maybe it's not. I won't spoil. And then same thing like with Richard Chizmar's like Chasing the Boogeyman. That is a book that reads like true, like you will be second guessing whether or not what you're reading is factual or not, because it's just written in a way that is very much like that. But if I have people that I talk to who are, reading like a lot of, I don't want to say like lit fic, but like, sometimes even like romance, or they're like looking
Mhm.
to explore like female rage, I'm pointing them to CJ Lead, Rachel Harrison, Jomo Moore,
Mhm.
stuff like that. That those themes are like really, really prevalent. If there's people who like Stephen King and want something else, I mean, like there's plenty of authors who are doing stuff, similar to him right now that are writing in ways that kind of channel his stuff. If there's people who really enjoy like actiony things, like really fast paced things, or like Jonathan Jans writes stuff that moves very, very quickly, in my opinion. So like I would maybe point them there. There's like something really for everybody,
For
and like
everyone.
yeah, the big thing too is like there's authors like Nat Cassidy and Clay McLeod Chapman who like they do a lot of everything. So like, depending on what it is, like I might recommend When the Wolf Comes Home or Ghost Eaters, depending on what people are looking for.
Yeah.
But, you just kinda I think that the key to, like, opening doors is meeting people where they're at instead of, like, throwing a generic book at them all of the time if it can be helped. Like, my favorite authors to, like, recommend, though, are, like, Grady when they're starting out is, like, Grady
Yeah.
Hendrix, Rachel Harrison,
Yes.
because I do find that those are, like, the accessible stories, right?
I
Like,
think
you're
so
gonna
too.
find threads of what you're already reading in those books, but you're
Mhm.
gonna get offered something a little bit more, and
Yes.
that's really, really important to open some doors.
I think so too. Those were my go-to people, like, without you probably knowing that was my answer. Those are mine that I tend to hand to people.
Perfect then.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like I've been reading a lot of other books for, like, as we're continuing to interview people, and it's amazing to me to see whether it's something that's for YA, or, just the depth and the breadth of everything that, just some of these like novellas, and we just had Chloe
Yeah.
on, but like Mewing, it's like, I know that it gets into some, a little bit of, I didn't think it was that crazy, but it does get into a little bit of craziness, but
Yeah.
I feel like if you're a female, like it's a great thing to read. You've probably read some of it, or I want to try to have an arsenal of other books to start
Yeah.
getting post Cackle, or something from Grady Hendrix, just because I feel like they're going to be hungry for more. It's like, what's the next one, and what's the next one? So um
I think that those are authors that I don't think anyone's reads those books and reads it and comes away saying, I hated this.
Yeah.
It's like
You
it's
can't.
very difficult to read such sharp teeth or cackle, and come away not having some sort of emotional reaction to it because there's so much honesty and truth outside of, whatever the trope it is that is also in the book.
Mhm. So then,
Yeah.
since you read other books, is there anything that you've read that you feel like should have been in the horror section, or you're like, it wasn't labeled horror, but it might as well have been?
Yeah, the standard answer for that is always Karen Slaughter's Pretty Girls.
Okay. Okay.
It is just a very gnarly thriller, and kind of hate that it has that reputation because I just think it's being honest. I don't think it's hiding behind anything. There's no fluff really. It's very gritty, like a lot of Karen's work is. And I think that, a lot of times a lot of people a lot of thriller readers, I should say, get really upset when they read, or I've seen that when they read that book, they're like, well, we didn't know it was going to be this intense, and that's very fair. That's totally fair. Like, I get it. However, when you're talking about violent crimes against women, that's horrific. Like that, there's no
Yeah.
world in which that's not horrific. And I think, the thing, going a little bit back to Rachel's work and why it really, really resonates with me. Like I said, it's accessible. Like, it's going to bring people in across the aisle to read something that maybe they haven't before, because she does write in a way that's very relatable, right? Like, it's easy to relate to her characters. But more than anything is, like, she's so deftly will pack so much more into a story that you don't really realize until much later down the line, that says more about like what you like and you enjoy as a horror reader, than like whenever you reflect back on it, you know?
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that her writing is so intelligent and well informed about the human experience that an immediate connection, and it's one that says, well, if you're willing to shake hands in the dark with this demon, maybe you'll look at this one too.
Yeah.
And
That's a great line.
it's a really honest conversation, and I think, there's a lot of honesty that could be had in the world right now, and I think that that's one of the things about horror that I really enjoy is just how honest it is. It's about literally facing down the thing that scares you the most. I don't know what's more honest than that. So yeah, those are the things that I think, it's always, I have such a hard time with genre because as somebody who wants to point people in the right direction, genre is such a tool in getting people to understand what they're in for, and you never want to put the wrong book in the wrong person's hands and have them be like severely disappointed. But at the same time, like, books can be so many different things that it feels a little criminal to sometimes categorize them as
Yeah.
one.
And
So
it's hard though because, it's a format that is so deep and, you have to spend the time to read it and go through it. So how do
exactly.
you possibly recommend it without having some kind of a label, but at the same time, it's so limiting as to, you know, because if you were to say something from Rachel, you could say, well, it's got, this horror trope, this, but then you flip it and you could speak to someone with literary fiction and say, well, it has this and this and this. So my goal here is just to get people I want them to do both aisles. I want them to basically leave
Yeah.
the horror aisle and go into literary fiction and say, wow, that was a really screwed up book. And probably should have been in the horror aisle. Like, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure why it isn't. And vice versa of if you're already reading these things and it's this intense, then why wouldn't you try something like this? And I just, always want it to be less of a solitary activity. I want it to be something that feels
Yeah.
that we're connecting as a community, which is why I think it's so important that, no matter who has a podcast, we celebrate and we be very inclusive because everybody's doing the good work in some particular way and we all have our own
Absolutely.
spin on it. But for me, this is more or less like just trying to say, okay, how do we get more people involved? How do we help authors to connect with wider audiences that ordinarily would shut them out and not even consider looking at them? And for readers to be like, you're missing out on something you could just absolutely love and resonate with, but simply because it has this label, you're not even considering it, which is where I was at.
Yeah.
And sounds like you may have been too.
100%. And like, I think my favorite, I just remember that I have this hot take, so I don't know how hot it is. But you remember I read The Secret History by Donna Tartt, and I was like, why the fuck is this not a horror novel?
Okay,
This
I
is
have this book and I haven't
terrifying.
read it yet. So now I'm very excited.
Dude, it's like, I don't want to say too much because I think it's one of those things that you should go and inform your own opinions on it before anybody else says anything. But like, there are certain aspects of that book that feel so hellish to me that I'm like, if you can read The Secret History by Donna Tartt, there's no reason that you shouldn't be reading horror, in my opinion. That's my hot take, I guess.
Or like, surprise, you already are.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
kind of the part of it. So I'm looking at my Goodreads here, and I'm just looking at two of the books that I just recently read that were not in the horror section, but I feel like they should have been. Shark Heart, one of those where, I mean, that is like grief horror entirely. Shark Heart
Yes.
by Emily Habeck. Have you read that?
I haven't read it, but I've heard enough about it to know, like, it's got that out there premise
Oh my
and the
gosh.
grief to like, why is it not in the horror
Yes, and it
section?
has all of the depth of generational traumas and the things that have impacted just overall, like
Yeah. I think if you
from
can read What Kind of
generation to
Mother, then you can
generation.
read that book. Yeah.
What'd you say?
I think if you can read What Kind of Mother by Clay McLeod Chapman, you can definitely read that book and vice versa.
Yeah. But then like another book that's really popular is like The Paper Palace. Like that one, for God's sake, that should have some trigger warnings on there. Like, because I mean, I loved it. Don't get me wrong, but it is nothing but like very, very bad thing in that book.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that there is so much out there and that we can have this, but it's like, it just feels to me like, especially because Adam, he's so open to reading certain things. And if I really love it, he'll let me butt in line and say like, would you please read this? But it's not something that he gravitates towards. He really loves the horror, first and foremost. And I feel like now he's read every classic I think I can think of. So I shouldn't label him as only the horror reader, but as of late, right? Like it's hard for you to want to branch out because you've found so many wonderful writers. And I feel like I'm trending that way now that when I'm looking for books, I'm like, okay, I'm really in this space. But at the same time, there's so much other things out there. And I know, it stresses me out to think that I won't be able to read everything before I die. But,
100%.
but, at the same time, it's just like, I don't want people to miss out on some of these things that I'm just, so I got to figure out like, do we need to design an app? I wish like,
Yeah.
I saw somebody on or I guess it was an Instagram reel, but he was like, oh, Goodreads, you changed your logo. Great.
Logo,
Great.
but
So,
nothing else.
yes, nothing else. So it's like, oh, okay, so you're going to recommend, like, if you like this, you're probably going to like this. Is like, no, definitely not at all. And that's what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be a personal algorithm here, I guess, like in some capacity, which I know so many people do when they put up their books. If you like this, if you like that. And I've also said to, Emma Murray, I love how she's putting like playlists that go with her books. We're just bringing in an entire other like genre of, maybe not genre, that's not the word. We're bringing in another
Media.
type of media.
Yeah, Rachel always does that too.
Yeah. And
with playlists.
it just makes it fully more like all encompassing.
And it's interesting because
Yeah.
like your art, Anna, is, the last two, big pieces that you've shared at least are both inspired by books as well. So it's like this huge sort of cross creative space that
Yes.
like is being, cultivated through these really great books.
Yeah, I think the thing about like the work that you do whenever you make a playlist or like when you do like these things, it's like for lack of a better word, and I hate how modern it sounds. It's like you're curating a vibe, and if it's a vibe that resonates with somebody else, then maybe they'll pick up that book. And I feel like that's probably one of the most accessible ways to reach people these days, just like given the way that the world turns. Um, and I really like what y'all are doing with the podcast because I do think it's important that you have readers reaching across the aisle to try new things regardless of genre. I mean, obviously we're a little bit more passionate about horror around here, but I think, being a little too selective is like how you end up with the problem of
Yeah.
media literacy issues and not understanding empathy and like where other people are coming from, like all that good stuff. So I think that it is really important to like branch out and try new things. I wish that there was an easier, more succinct way. Like if Goodreads could get their shit together, that'd be awesome. But I think that it also takes away, like if that were to happen though, I do kind of love that it is y'all doing this, like as like Rebecca and Adam, people who we know and like who y'all are willing to get to know other people and be like, hey, well maybe try this. And I think
Yeah.
it's so much more special when it's a person than a machine, like every single time.
I love that too. As soon as I was saying, I was like, but yeah, but that takes the fun away, right? Just to have the algorithm,
Yeah.
like the personal touch really does make it the community. Help me to remember, who was it that I just remember early on when you really started getting into this community that someone said it's really important for you as a writer to read outside of your genre.
I feel like a couple people have said that.
Yeah, I think
Sleep
that
is fine.
Maybe it's not attributed to one specific person, but especially so many people that we met at StokerCon
Yeah.
or want to be writing. And it's funny because I've said to Adam for, I don't know, probably 10, 15 years, I've said like, oh, I would like to read this book or write a book about this one thing, XYZ. And I've said it for several years, but I've never really had the intention for it, whatever. Well, now that I'm like reading all these books, I've gone to StokerCon, I've met all these people, and I'm just like, and then after watching Evil Dead by Josh Mallerman, I'm like, I just need to do this. Like, I feel like I'm even thinking in literary style. I was saying to Adam, I'm like, I'll look down at the dog and I'm like, and the dog was da 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 da. And I'm like, oh my God, it's taken over my brain. But I wanted to say that because I think so many readers could be and should be writers, and reading outside of your genre really helps you to bring in other aspects for if you do want to pick to a specific genre.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it might have been Hunter Burke that I was talking to that he mentioned. Like we were talking about how the importance of reading outside of genre because I remember talking about like Daniel Krauss and SGJ, like Stephen Graham Jones, like how their works feel a little bit more textured whenever they talk about like what they read that went into those books because they read like outside of the genre. And I completely agree with that sentiment about if you need to write it, just fucking write it. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying to take my own advice and just do it. But like even if it doesn't go anywhere, even if it doesn't mean anything, it still means something to you. And if it's taking up that much real estate in your mind, then
Yeah.
like it's obviously worth something.
Yeah.
So I think the exercise of like just getting shit out on paper or a Word doc, whatever the hell you want to use, I think it's really important. And I think it'll also change your brain a little bit about how you look at the creative process, like when you're reading.
It
There are
does.
certain things that until you sit down and write, you're not going to think about whenever you're reading a book. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of times the one thing that I don't want to say I hate or that I dislike, but the one drawback of reading the way that I read for the podcast or for reviews is like the pace. And sometimes whenever you read that much, you can kind of get like in a slump or like in a, kind of like a glazed over kind of like, okay, I'm going. But to sit down and write and then like when you pick up again, you will think about what you're reading entirely differently, I think
That's a
personally.
great lens to take on, take off, and try, just I try to think more when I read now about more like go a little slower because someone took a lot of time and effort to choose these words
Yeah.
and to put it there. I definitely feel like that's it because I am a fast reader, and certain books, Adam and I were talking about that last weekend. Sometimes when someone says, oh, this book didn't resonate with me, it's like, well, how fast were you going? Because some of these deserve to be more like a slow leaching like rain that soaks in, and you need that to mount, whereas other ones, maybe you can go a little faster for it because it doesn't take away from the impact.
I think we've talked about it. We talked about it in our first episode when we were just talking to each other, how so many people approach horror novels and horror literature in a similar way that they do horror films. And they expect the same
Yeah.
thing out of horror literature that they expect out of a horror film when the different media aims to do something differently. And I think that our sort of culture and this whole social media, Instagram, Bookstagram, book talk culture has sort of skewed people to look at books in that way, that a book is this thing I spend a couple hours with and walk away entertained. And I think that there are some books that are there to do that, but I think especially horror literature, because of what horror is, and Anna, you touched on this, saying that it's kind of like that genre that we look at those things that either scare us or, societal ills, all kinds of stuff go into the horror genre. So it's not, especially when you're spending 200, 300, 400 or more pages with it.
I thought you were going to say dollars at the bookstore. I was like, yeah, yeah, I know where you're going with this. I understand.
So when you're spending that time and the author has spent that time, it's not just something that you either listen to or read quickly and move on to the next thing. Like horror, like to me, when I think about horror, it's looking at this problem, this horrible thing, and not turning away and saying, why is this happening? What can I learn from it? You know, and sort of really sitting in that space instead of running away to the next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I know you have right now, you have your Buffalo Hunter shirt on, and you just interviewed Stephen Graham Jones, Anna. So
Yes.
I just read my first Stephen Graham Jones book, and I was like, I told Adam, like, why wasn't this billed as historical fiction?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I was expecting like it to be that, and I'm not saying that there isn't scary things, but it really was not a scary book in any shape or form for me.
Yeah, the point of the book was not to.
It was really about like, this is horrible what they've done to these tribes. And it's absolutely horrible how they have to exist. And just to me, I was like, this is kind of the perfect example of a book that is labeled as one thing, but anybody and everybody should read it. We all should be understanding more about what's happened to indigenous tribes. And, just it, I don't know how anybody can read it and be scared, but they should be like, wow, we've done some really horrible things. There's some horrific things, and look at the suffering, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And I think that you kind of touch on the idea that a book being a horror novel and a book being scary are not the same thing.
That's what I always think, though. How can I get it out of my brain? I don't. I can't. I'm trying.
No, it's so true though. But like, especially with Buffalo Hunter x Hunter, that is such a I think that that's a dread book in my reading. It's like it's one that you say that you're like, fuck, man. You're like you just feel bad, right? Like
Yeah.
in the pit of your stomach, you just feel bad. And because of the atrocities that unfold before you. And, like even for reasons beyond that, like the reality of living like if we're going to take away like all of the quote unquote horror things that make it horror, we're just going to talk about a man who has turned into something he absolutely loathes and having to live with that. Is that not the most literary thing of all?
Yes.
But, it's one of those things that I kind of get why it happens. I do wish that it was one of those things that it could be marketed and branded in a way that was more inclusive and much like Adam said, like with the time of like instant gratification on to the next book. Here's the quick and dirty of it. Like, here's the synop, here's the whatever, like the quick pitch. It's just really hard to find and I think podcasting is the fourth because you get to yap for however long you want about whatever you want, quite frankly. And I think that allows it to breathe a little bit more rather than an Instagram graphic, rather than, what shelf it's on at the bookstore. Because even that is, a however long advertisement until you walk past it, right? Like, I think that we're just getting to a place where the stories that we're telling are really complex because we live in really complex times
Yes.
and the marketing hasn't caught up with it. And I don't know that it ever will.
Wow. That's such a perfect way to say it, because we were, that's basically what we said in our first episode, is so much of it has to do with the marketing. I'm sitting here trying to problem solve for this, and I'm thinking, I wish that there could be, and obviously this is just my quick hot take is like, if you could have, a series of like colors, and it's like, okay, if you see these colors on the back of the book, it's like, it has this and this and this and this. And it's like, oh, okay. If you find this book, like that has 3 or more of these colors, most likely this is a book for you. Like, is it even enough to just have one word to say it? Do you know what I mean? If you did like
Yeah.
every book had, okay, well, I see it has these colors in it. It's like those are my favorites. Like I love to read teal, purple, and yellow.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to pick this book up. Right. And it's less about what aisle it's in and more about like what you're going to find in. I just think it would you'd be surprised if it was like later on, it's like, guess what? That was originally labeled as a horror book, or that was labeled as a romantic fantasy or whatever. Cause there's sections that I'm not going into the fantasy.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to
Yeah.
pick up most of the romance.
It's really interesting being like a genre fan in the 90s. When you went into a bookstore, there wasn't a science fiction section, a fantasy section, and a horror section. They were all together. It was sci-fi, fantasy, and horror was one section, and you had to kind of figure it
Yeah,
out
that's
from
true.
there. And now it's like going back to Anna's logo. You walk into a Barnes and Noble, it should really just say books and shit when you go to the genres, because like it really doesn't matter, because like
It doesn't, does it?
like I'll go to one Barnes and Noble and Such Sharp Teeth is in the fantasy section, and then I go to the next one and
Yeah,
it's in
that's
horror.
yep.
It's like Odd Body by Rose Keating is in like fiction, and that's a horror like collection.
So 100%.
Yeah, and so it's just like it is arbitrary, and I don't know if that is told to each store differently, if they have some sort of choice in that. But the
I guess
days
that's
of
who we're interviewing next. We're getting a Barnes and Noble manager.
but the days of walking in and the bookstore telling you what kind of book it is, like as a reader you have to be informed to know like it's probably not right. And while that might not be like an issue for someone that reads a book a month, someone that's really trying to dive into things and read more widely, it really is an issue. And you have to do, with so many other things in the world, if you're not doing your own research, you're losing out on so many great books.
Yeah. It's like a failure to launch situation. Like if you walk in and you grab the wrong, like unfortunately that one bad reading experience and like speaking as somebody who's like this has happened because I mean there have been peaks and valleys of reading in my life, like I've
Sure.
never read as intensely as I do now, but there have been times that I've picked up a book and I've tried to get into it and this is something that everybody loves and I just can't freaking
Yeah.
stand it and like I'm like that's part of the reason why I was like, well maybe this is just not for me and then you walk away and you stay away for a
Yes, you
while.
do. Yes, I feel like, wait a minute, what did I miss? Like, what did everybody else
Yeah,
get that I
exactly.
didn't get? And it's so
And you feel
isolated.
like you're broken somehow, like, what's
Yes.
wrong with my
Yeah,
reading?
Yes, yes. Well, I particularly enjoy the
100%.
whole books and shit or whatever because many, many, many years ago, I was working at a place and someone walked in and they're like, I was like, what, 22 or something.
Yeah,
I
it
was
was a
working
job
at a
fair, right?
hotel
Yeah.
and they were having a job fair at the hotel and he walks in, he's like, yeah, I'm here for the jobs and shit. And I was like, man, buddy, you are ready. And so anytime you can add in shit to anything, I'm a
It just
huge
makes it 10
fan.
times better.
It
So,
does. So,
I
expect you to
agree
create that
wholeheartedly.
merch, please.
mhm.
I need it. But
Anna Rose reads and shit.
no, I think this is the discussion that I really, really wanted to get in. And I love your take on this. And, so much of this, my favorite thing so far, you said so many rich things, but my favorite thing you said was, I don't think the marketing has caught up to it yet. And it is evolving so fast and readers are asking for something. And that to me is such a positive because that means that there's a large community. There's huge engagement. It means bookstores are coming back up again. Reading is evolving from this solitary event to events and groups. And that to me gives me a lot of hope that marketing will catch up. But right now, the fact that it's so in demand and even that there is, hey, as seen on Book Talk, and like, oh yeah, I can't exactly remember what I saw, but I want to look at this. It's just powerful, and it shows like that people are driving what needs to be read and wants to be seen. And to me, that also shows like there's room for more authors to come out here because all works have a place, and I just always feel like everyone deserves to have a place for their art and to shine. I want this to be the most inclusive community, whether you're producing something, writing something, reading something, just a huge supporter, whatever it is, like it all goes together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really agree with that. And like even, today, like 2025, it wasn't until like I had not found a Louisiana horror thriller book that I really enjoyed until I read Of Flesh and Blood. And I remember wanting to reach for a book just like that in college and it not being there. And maybe that was on me, like maybe I didn't look hard enough, but when you're talking in the realm of accessible books, you're talking about people who are going into to bigger stores like Barnes and Noble, and you want to be able to pick out from a big five publisher. Like I love indies and I think that there is an incredible role for indie publishers. But as far as like what people are gonna reach for, like on the big commercial side, I would love to create a space where indies get that space as well.
Yeah.
Because there are stories in there that people are gonna reach for that I just don't think they're given the space to do
Yeah.
so. But, like, being able to get a Flesh and Blood out of Barnes& and Noble anywhere in America is, like, such an that book really means a lot to me because it is a Louisiana story, and knowing Hunter and NL, like, they're just I really, really relate to them as guys who grew up around here.
Uh,
And so, like, that's the thing, right? Like, you want the thing that means so much to you personally to be accessible everywhere else. And it's like that's why I want to elevate indies and like get it to the point where there is space for all of it because there needs to be. Like there are people who are looking for these stories, they're just not super easy to
yeah.
find
Yeah.
because the marketing's not there.
I think that's one of my favorite things when we go to these like events locally here. You walk up to the table and you meet the author and you're like, okay, pitch me your book. What do you have today? It's like, well, which one do you want to hear about? I'm like, all of them. I want to hear about all of
Yeah.
them, and it's amazing because I might look at the book cover and think like, I'm not interested. But then by the time they're done pitching it, I'm like, all right, yeah. And they're like, you want it? I'm like, yeah, I want them all because it's like how am I supposed to say no to their baby that they just and they're so passionate about it and it's so good. And there's books that the one guy was it with the Necronomicon.
Necronomnom.
Yes, I would have never. And I was like,
It's a cookbook.
that one, but the guy with the longer hair.
J.A. Barrios Tenebris, yeah.
Yes. And he was just like, come up to my table, talk to me, let's go
Yeah.
through all these things. And I was like, Okay, yeah, like coming from such religious upbringing, I was like, this is such a sin for me to buy
Yeah.
this I was already like deconstructing, but I was like, I want to read it. Can you talk about what the premise of that is? Because I,
It's basically like a creation story,
yes.
but like evil as shit.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'm kind of like really scared and
And it's funny
intimidated.
because he, like, lovely human being,
Huge.
but he looks exactly like you would think someone that wrote a creation story, but evil as shit would look.
Yes.
And like when he's like, "Come talk to me," I'm like, "Oh God!"
And I was
But
like,
then,
Adam, come over. This
then
is
like
great.
5 minutes later, I'm like, "This man is the sweetest. I love him." You know?
Yeah.
And again, like that is the horror genre. Like it
Oh,
sometimes
100%.
looks
Yeah.
exactly like you think it's gonna look, but when it starts talking, you're like, "Oh, this isn't what I thought I
Yeah.
was gonna, you know, to have." And, to sort of like start winding this down a little bit, I just wanted to say, like, or to ask, we've talked a lot about different things in horror, but what is your, like, when you think of the horror genre, as a literary form, what do you think it is? How would you define it?
And please,
I mean, I kind
for
of
your
touched
full
on it.
answer, please make sure you add in shit to it.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Um, I think like I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think horror to me is like raw honesty, right?
Oh,
Like to me horror is when you're willing to shine a light on the thing that like might bring you shame, that it may make you look crazy, it may make you look insane, but we're going to confront it and we're going to confront it together in 350 pages or less. I think the thing about horror is like it's very self-referential, right? Like we're dealing with fear, and that's the really cool intellectual aspect of it. But beyond that, whenever you can be honest with yourself about what scares you, and you're willing to face that down and pick up a horror novel and like be honest with yourself, I think that there's a lot that can go on there. It makes your life a little bit different. I think whenever you're that kind of honest, or you're willing to try to be that kind of honest at least. I think right now we live in a world where we really don't know what the truth is and what's not. Like not to get on like my X-Files soapbox, right?
yeah.
But, like there's just you never really know, right? Like we've never been more disconnectedly connected through social media
Right.
and like what's out there in the
Disconnectedly
media
connected.
and
We've never been more aware of how much we've been lied to and willing to accept the lies at
exactly.
the same time, it seems like, for a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing that resonates for me with horror is like finding what is truthful to me, right? Like there is a reason why Rachel's and Gemma's and CJ's stories like really, really speak to me. It's because they are part of my truth, right? And they're like CJ's American Rapture is fucking horrific, ripped me to shreds. But I came out of that book feeling a hell of a lot less alone and just like a little bit different. Like that book changed me a little bit for
Yeah,
the
I
better,
feel
I
like
think.
it seems weird to say, but like I feel like I'm a better person now having read American Rapture.
I do.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Yeah, sure. And so I think, in the time of feeling as disconnected as we all are, I think it's really important to reach for the things that do connect us. And if that's being brutally honest through literature, I think that's what horror is. I think it may take some really crazy ass forms, right? Like I'm thinking like of Sarah Gailey's like spread me, like if we're gonna make a sexy virus, a horny virus, but if it speaks to some part of you that you're afraid about being vulnerable or, like whatever that I haven't read it yet, but I've heard enough about it, like what that book explores, then hell yeah, you got to read it. You got to celebrate it and you got to elevate it. You got to get other people to read it
You
too.
got to read it.
Because if not, it's going to,
You got to elevate it.
yeah,
You
it's
got
going
to
to go away.
celebrate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right.
It's a good tagline there.
Yeah. So that's what horror is to me, is just being very, very honest, being brutally honest sometimes, making, being uncomfortable. There's nothing comfortable about reading about Good Stab's plight, right? And like his own uncomfortableness with his experience. But I came out of that book, I think a different person as well with a different perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that it's reading with a purpose horror for me. Like sometimes it's just fun. Like sometimes there's some just really gory fun shit that I love, but a lot of times with horror, there's like a really big takeaway for me in the end, or it makes me think about something a little bit different. And it's just through being really honest
Well, I think that's
and shit.
yeah, yeah. So,
And
um, I just want to thank you again. Like, this was exactly everything that I hoped this conversation would be. I want to give you just a couple seconds here to say where we can find you, and if there's anything big on the horizon for you that you want to talk about as well.
Oh, well, thank you both so much for having me. I am very flattered that y'all asked me at this stage of the game. Like, I know that y'all are just starting out, but I love what y'all are doing with the podcast and the conversations that y'all are fostering. So it's like really an honor to be part of it. I'm gonna try and be assistant, but I'm everywhere. I am literally all over the internet. I have a website now. It's annarosereads.com. It has like all of my socials. I'm on all the socials. Podcast is on most podcasting platforms. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Substack. Yeah, pretty much. If you look up Anna Rose Reads, I'm sure I'll come up somewhere.
Google
But
Anna Rose
as
Reads and
far as
shit, and you'll
what,
see.
yeah, exactly. I'm still doing podcasting interview stuff throughout the rest of the year. I don't have anything like super, super big or super special like to market. I'm just gonna keep on keeping on. I should have episodes out just about every week through around October-ish. I'll probably be taking a little break after that. But yeah, I think that's the
Perfect. Well, once again, thank you. And we're honored that you would come on
Yes.
here. Obviously, we have not released a single episode yet. So we're very thankful that you would be willing to come talk with us about horror. And hopefully, this can be something that we do again as things change. And maybe once we see marketing catching up, we can have some more conversations about horror and just sort of, where we see it going and how it affects us. So thank you again and really appreciate you.
No, thank you guys so, so much. This has been a really, really cool conversation. I love what y'all are doing, and I'm really excited to see like who else y'all are talking to, those kind of conversations, and what everybody has to say, because I think it's really important right now that we talk about these things.
You're the best. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
What a great episode to talk with Anna Rose Reads. We got into so many deep conversations of how marketing impacts, how so many books should, just really not having any label at all, and really supporting whether it's an indie author or you're going into a small independent bookstore or the big ones. It's books and shit. So you need to make sure that you're doing your research and looking beyond what it is, and just come in with an open mind, because the horrors do exist in all different books, and you're going to be a better person from having sat with the uncomfortable nature, whether it's labeled as lit fic or horror. So I feel like we've really cracked the spine on a few different books here, but until next time, when we crack another spine to see what horrors we can find, be well.